welcome to episode 103 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 23rd of November 2020. I'm Joe, and with me are Phelan.
Hello.
Graham.
Good evening.
And Will.
Hello.
Well, I've got no jokes this week because life is just too grim, so let's get on with the news. The first thing is that YouTube DL is back on GitHub, mostly thanks to the EFF helping them out.
I do wonder how much of this was just accepting that once source code is out there, you can't get rid of it with a DCMA, and just giving up and allowing it forwards.
Well, if you read the statement that GitHub put out on their blog, I don't think that's the case. I think that the EFF got in touch and pointed out that it was a spurious claim by the RIAA. And so GitHub was sort of forced, really, to backtrack on this. And you can kind of see it from their point of view, can't you? That they had to do it. They get this DMCA request and they kind of have to do something about it. But now they said they are going to put a process in place to avoid this sort of thing in the future, hopefully.
I think that was pretty cool where they have the changing statements and they have like 8 points that they're going to make. Okay, being cynical, I could say that maybe they should have been there in the first place, but like it's good that they're actually doing them, erring on the side of the developer and things like that. And having a team of experts, be legal or software based, that are going to look through all the claims made by the DMCA. And then if it's a bogus claim, reject it. And they're kind of defaulting to the reject sort of stance. I mean, I don't know why that wasn't in place, but I guess, there's a lot of cost involved in that. And maybe only if you're backed by Microsoft could you justify it.
I saw in the just after we talked about it last as well that Nat Friedman, who's like the CEO of GitHub, before the story broke, was on YouTube DL's IRC channel asking if he could get in touch with the maintainers of the project as soon as possible. So I kind of changed my mind a little bit.
But GitHub has also said that they're going to put $1 million aside for legal fights in the future for developers. It's funny how they just keep using the word developers all the way through their blog post. We're standing up for developers. It's all about developers. It seems like Bormer's ghost is echoing through the blog post there. But the EFF blog post about it is pretty funny. They say that like the examples in the code of like Taylor Swift videos and stuff, that was not infringing. It has been changed voluntarily by the YouTube DL developers, but they didn't need to do it, is what the EFF is saying, which is pretty funny. But that has all been sorted out now. And like we said last time, it was a bit dumb of them, really, wasn't it, to have blatant copyright infringing videos in their documentation. So now they've fixed that, and it sounds like it's going to be all right going forward.
My takeaway from this is really it's a high-profile story. It went through the grinder, but the end result is quite positive for other projects that are doing similar things and for content and accessibility to that content on the web.
I mean, if you're an open source project, you just can't buy that publicity.
Mm-hmm.
Last week, Drew DeVault wrote a piece, "We can do better than DuckDuckGo." And I saw this going around and a lot of discussion about it. And he basically has 3 grievances. It's not open source, it's not a search engine, and the results suck.
Which is not wrong.
I have to say, I think Will just alluded to it, but I agree. I've used DuckDuckGo as my default search engine for years, ever since I started using Arch. And I think my muscle...
Had to get it in.
Yeah. But the most typed command I've got, I think, in my browser is exclamation mark G.
Of course, yeah. For the uninitiated, that gives you Google results rather than Bing.
I started using it in earnest a few years ago, and yeah, as Graham says, I just kept using exclamation mark G for everything, and in the end I just thought, this is silly, I give up.
One thing that's got me back a little bit is because I delete all my cookies in my browser session, so every time you go through that Google song and a dance, accept the privacy settings, and so I'll sometimes get the DuckDuckGo results by default, or use the exclamation mark which takes you to the top hit if I know exactly where I'm going. And I like the way you can theme the background exactly like your lovely Plasma KD theme. But now, this is an interesting thing. I don't know if a lifetime of using Google results has burnt the neural pathways in my brain to expect Google results, or whether it's just really bad search results from Bing.
I think Bing's just awful.
Yeah.
But he does propose an alternative here. And he says that it doesn't make sense for it to be fully decentralized because that it just isn't really practical. And I don't know, is he a dreamer here for thinking that it's possible to come up with something that is better?
MacPhail in the Telegram group summed this up quite nicely for me. He said, I'm not a fan of his writing. He's pretty arrogant or comes across so. I'm glad he feels like you can engineer a better search engine, but he's not going to bother for the time being. It's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's one thing to say, this is no good, we need something better. But yeah, if you can't actually do it, then there's not much point saying that. Well, unless you can inspire people, maybe. But it just seems like a bit of a tall order to me to come up with a better search engine. Because there are people who've tried this, and he links to some of them, and they are a bit ropey, quite frankly. But you use Startpage, don't you, Phelan, which is essentially anonymized Google.
To be honest, I tried DuckDuckGo and I couldn't stand it. And I don't know, like there's loads of cool things that they do. Like I'd love if you could kind of combine some of the things that they do with Startpage. But I even found that the bang G command in DuckDuckGo did not bring me back the same results that I got in Startpage. So I don't know what's going on there. I'm not sure, but yeah, I kind of fell back to Startpage because I did try a few of the other ones, like that Search X one, and I tried a few of the meta engines, and I don't know, it just gets fairly painful after a while. I'm kind of spoilt by the fact the way Google does work quite succinctly, and even that bubble that you end up in, it's generally what you're looking for. That's the danger with it. A decentralized one would be great, and giving it your own set of like whitelisted domains that really that's all you're looking for, that'd be good too.
I think you mean allow listed.
Sorry, yes, I do. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's definitely good things here, and it would be nice if some of those projects could kind of come together, because what's the point in having about 5 different broken search engines? But, you know, therein lies the open source failing. We'll end up with 6 when he gets on making this easy one that he thinks he can do.
Yep. Okay, this episode is sponsored by Datadog, the performance monitoring and analytics solution for real-time visibility into your Linux environment. Combining metrics, traces, and logs in one unified platform allows you to get a bird's eye view of your entire infrastructure. You can also see any underutilized cloud or on-premises servers via the real-time auto-generated host map. Datadog's machine learning-based alerts eliminate false positives and make sure that you only receive alerts on issues that matter. You can automatically detect unanticipated outliers, anomalies, and errors with Watchdog, the auto-detection engine that surfaces performance problems in your applications without any manual setup or configuration. Start your free Datadog trial today by visiting datadog.com/late-night-Linux. Start your free trial, create one dashboard, and you'll get a free Datadog t-shirt. That's datadog.com/late-night-Linux. On to a bit of admin then, and first of all, thank you everyone for supporting us on PayPal and Patreon. It's very much appreciated. If you want to join those people, you can go to latenightlinux.com/support. And remember, for $5 or more on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed. And if you want to get in contact with us, latenightlinux.com/contact. But do get in contact with us. I've been saying this for a few shows now. We've been collecting a few questions and discussion topics that we will do in the future. And check out Late Night Linux Extra. I think I mentioned the Raspberry Pi 400 one that I did a few weeks ago. There was one last week with Drew DeVore talking about his just crazy setup. I mean, I don't want to spoil it too much, but he uses a Windows VM on Fedora so that he can use Citrix to get into a work laptop halfway across the country, and then uses WSL to SSH into his servers. And if you got pissed off by the Kyle episodes, Drew is the complete opposite of that. This is a man who will just go to any lengths to use Linux, and he's enthusiastic about it all. So do check that out. There'll be a link in the show notes. And stay tuned for another one coming up in about a week. Okay, this episode is sponsored by Entroware. Go to entroware.com. Entroware sells computers with Ubuntu and Ubuntu Mate pre-installed. They've got a range of desktops, laptops, and servers, and most parts are configurable, so you can pick the CPU, RAM, and storage that's right for you. If you can't find exactly what you want, then do contact them, and they'll work with you on a bespoke solution that's perfect for your needs. They ship to the UK, Republic of Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And if you do buy one of their machines, there's a little drop down at checkout and you can select Late Night Linux so they'll know that we sent you. So go to Entroware.com for all your Linux computing needs. Speaking of feedback then, we got some from Matt and he writes, "It seems that on more or less every show during your discussions, the concept of trust is battered around. It looks like you all have varying ideas about trust from an organization, and it's not just linked to FOSS and proprietary organizations. It's almost as if there's a utopia you all dream of, but it's slightly different for each of you. I would be interested to hear your more philosophical standpoints as to how and why you use the word trust and where you ultimately think that would take you." So yeah, this is an interesting question. How do we decide who to trust?
So many things to consider when you think about trust. You've got the company themselves. What is their motivation? What is their source of financial profit if that's the business they're in? And if that's not the business they're in, then it's even more appropriate about where are they getting their money. What are their goals? What are they going to do with your data? Are they going to be around for long enough to build up any kind of relationship with you? Are you going to trust them with your whatever it is that you're giving them? Money, reviews, data, information, whatever it is. So many things to consider. And if we break those down one by one, I still think we would end up in a different conclusion for each of us.
I think you're right about following the money, and if there's no money, following the motivation. What is the motivation for making this thing that I am putting my trust in? And if you look at the operating system that I'm using right now, which is essentially Ubuntu with XFCE, I'm giving Canonical root on my machine every time I do updates. And so I have to put ultimate trust in Canonical. And why do I do that? Well, because I think that they do believe in open source. The way they're trying to make money is the sort of Red Hat style services and support model, which seems like a pretty straightforward business model to me. And there may have been missteps in the past, but ultimately the motivations are relatively pure to me. They're more pragmatic than something like Triskel or whatever, but they are very much trustworthy to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't run my systems with it.
I think maybe my answer is going to be more philosophical because, I think the only person you can really trust is yourself, and I don't particularly trust myself very much. I think for me, that's what was so exciting about open source is that ultimately, if you don't trust Canonical or you don't trust whoever, you can, if you have to, if you're trapped on a desert island and all you've got is your laptop with the code, you can change the code, you can fix things yourself. And for me, that came about after years of, I don't want to say betrayal, but years of investing time and effort into learning something, only for that thing to change without me agreeing with the direction it's taking. And I don't agree with the direction that lots of open source projects take, but then it's the onus is on me then, if I don't agree, to change it. And that's what I trust more in open source than I do in other ways of doing this. And not just any open source. We could get into lots of licenses and whether we should still trust Google and all those big tech companies for having built a fortune on open source and where the GPL v3 sits in this or the AGPL. And these are really big discussions that are really difficult to answer. But ultimately, I think you've got to trust yourself to an extent and then take it from there. And one other thing that I really have learned is that even when smaller niche things look more exciting and more open, I find it much better to go with something that has millions of things deployed. And even if all the comments aren't positive or they're not as open, when it's been tested by millions of people and you know all the different aspects of that thing, that's more trustworthy, even if it's not perfect, because time and time again I've been burnt by following the small thing that always fails to deliver or often fails to deliver.
Yeah, you pretty much covered what I was going to say. But I think there is, like, my utopia would be the fact that I don't have to rely on any company. And we kind of have that, but, you can't build your own computer realistically. You can do close enough with some of the open source boards that are about. But even most of those, there's always something that you can't get hold of, like a firmware or a chipset driver or something like that. And I think it'd be great if the day comes where we can get a phone that's pretty much open, a computer board that's pretty much open. Then anything after that is just services, and services can be replicated, but hardware can't. And I think that's where the big stumbling block is at the moment still. you might not like Google, host your own email, no problem. You know, you might not like using YouTube, there's PeerTube, things like that. But come to a computer and, you know, some of the things that we've seen from Apple, even recently with the gatekeeper stuff where they're tracking every time you run an application. I mean, you know, that's ridiculous, possibly even dangerous for people as well. If you happen to be in a regime where you're not allowed to have certain stuff and they're able to clear text pick that up, then, you know, that could be somebody's life on the end of that.
Yeah, that was something that came to light over the last couple of weeks, where it turns out that on iOS and macOS, every time you open an application, it checks back home, essentially, via plain text, not even using SSL or whatever. And that is not them trying to spy on you. I don't think that Apple's motivations there were spying. I think that they had a technical reason for that, but it was just ill thought out. And because it's proprietary, you can't necessarily see that. And some people knew about it. I can't say I did. It came to light when they released their new Big Sur version, and their servers just got overwhelmed and people couldn't open applications. They were taking 5 minutes or whatever to open an application because they hadn't built into it that if it goes and checks and has some sort of communication with the server, but the server's really slow, then it waits for the reply. If you're totally offline, then you don't get the problem. But as the servers weren't totally down, they were just sort of struggling, creaking. And that really disappointed me because as proprietary and evil as Apple are, I thought their business model was just very straightforward. Sell expensive stuff and expensive services. So much more of a straightforward business model than Google, which is, you know, all about tracking and advertising, as we've talked about many times. But then you find out stuff like this and you think, yeah, if it's not open source, then you just can't trust it because it might not be that they're trying to be evil. They might just be useless.
Or someone from a 3-letter agency turned up and said, you're going to implement this or you're going off to jail. And Tim Cook went, okay. And, you know, that's the end of that. I mean, there's another story that we might link to that is like the NSA and has all the partner countries, some throughout Europe, where, you know, the NSA says you spy on that traffic for us and then we'll give you access to your own country's data because quite often security services are not allowed to spy on their own people. But it turned out that the NSA was spying on the Eurofighter Gripen F-35 contract that was undergoing review at the time. And, you know, this is a spy agency from a foreign power that they've allowed to spy on the data that has spied on their own data, which is unfortunate for them. So you never really know who you can trust or who's trusting someone else, or, you know, even Americans who are getting their own data spied on by all the Five Eyes countries and shipping it back to the NSA because the NSA directly is not allowed to spy on them.
But you come back to that hardware issue, right? And if you're running an Intel processor like I am right now, then that's got its own proprietary operating system on the CPU. And fuck knows what that's doing. It could be doing anything. And I could be running Triskel on top of it, but it wouldn't matter. I could be running completely free software, but it just doesn't matter because the hardware could be backdoored and who knows. But something that I ultimately trust is that I'm not important enough for anyone to give a shit enough to steal my data. And yeah, Google farms all of my data and tracks me, and, you know, Facebook tracks me around the web and stuff. But like, they're just trying to sell me adverts. And yeah, it is a bit creepy and that data could be used by someone, but am I really that important? Like, no, I'm just some dude. And that's perhaps a naive view of things. And maybe if this Tory government gets even more corrupt and totalitarian, maybe I should start worrying about it. But don't you have to be a bit arrogant, maybe, to think that you're important enough to be spied on?
It's not just that I think I'm that important, but collectively, if everybody is being spied upon, we are all collectively important, because that's exactly how Cambridge Analytica threw 2 elections in 2 different countries that affected many, many millions of people. It can look like a small infringement on you personally, but if you do that to everybody, then that's pretty much golden data there.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. I was going to sort of agree with Joe there. I think the decision is a trade-off. For me, it's a trade-off between ease of use and how much I trust that company. And for a certain amount of an easy life, I'm willing to give up some of my privacy, some of the things that I hold important to myself. Like Amazon don't pay tax, but I still use them because it's convenient for me to get stuff that I want the next day. Facebook have actually stolen people's data, but it's still quite a fun way of seeing what your friends are up to. There's definite trade-off here, and I think for most people, the man in the street, those sorts of things are not important, which is why they continue to use these services and will do in the future. And so to a certain extent, Joe, I think that you represent what the majority of people think, that it's just not that important. I'm but one person. Nobody cares what I've been doing. But then Phelim comes along and undermines that entire argument.
Well, do get in touch with us, latenightlinux.com/contact. Let us know what you think about all of that and how we're all wrong, probably. Okay, this episode is sponsored by DigitalOcean. Go to do.co/LNL and get $100 credit with 60 days to use it. DigitalOcean offers VMs, or droplets as they call them, with full root access in data centers all over the world with superfast storage and networking. These droplets start from $5 a month and go all the way up to huge amounts of RAM and CPU power, so you can deploy exactly what's right for your project. You can pick from multiple distros and start from a basic installation, or pick from dozens of one-click apps and be up and running in seconds. You can add more block or object storage if you need it, and DigitalOcean has managed databases in Kubernetes, great backups and snapshots, and a really useful Teams feature. So go to do.co/LNL and get started with your $100 credit. That's do.co/LNL. Bit of an extended KDE corner this time. First of all, your stuff, Phelim. The first one, the Linux App Summit.
Yeah, the Linux App Summit has just finished up recently, and some of the KDE developers and some of the known developers have done some talks. There's a great list. We'll provide a list to it all on YouTube there, and there's some good stuff there. But Greg KH was one of the keynote speakers. And he did a very good one talking about how not to break user space, like what they do in the kernel. And the main reason being, you don't want your users to not trust you anymore. And how when GNOME went to GNOME 3, a lot of trust was lost. Hence you have Mate and Cinnamon. And how he thinks KDE right now is doing the right thing, which they've obviously learned when they had their own hard lesson.
And what's this G-Compris is 20 years old?
So this is educational software for, I would say, sort of the primary school level. I don't know, somewhere between 5 to 12 sort of region. Cool stuff in there. Maths, language skills. There's even circuit diagrams, things like that. So I think it's quite cool. Been around for 20 years and keeps getting stronger. So they're looking for translators and stuff. So it's a really good project.
Shouldn't it be called Compris with a K rather than G-Compris? That's very confusing for KDE software.
I don't think it was a KDE project at the very start.
Right.
So they should really change that C to a K, I think so.
Yeah, definitely. And the KDE edition of the PinePhone is available.
Yeah, and just a good story about that. Anybody who's getting these phones expecting their next daily driver, it just kind of lays out the fact that this is the proper start-off point for getting a proper FOSS phone where everything is controlled from the free side, and kind of what we were talking about earlier, really. And the fact that, yes, it will be slow. It won't have as much memory. The camera might be grainy, but that's not the point of it. It's really to get that whole ecosystem and developer setup working properly so people can actually develop on something coming up to the future when maybe a revision 2 or 3 hardware comes out. It's already pre-built and ready to go.
Yeah, it's a good post. It's realistic, I think, in its expectations.
Yeah.
Well, I have actually been using KDE Neon. I haven't switched away from XFCE.
Yet.
As such, yet, yeah. But I have been using it full time on my media machine. And it's all right. I quite like it, I think. I had to do this because I wanted to change from my big first-gen i3 desktop to a small Gigabyte Bricks projector that I've talked about years ago, which is essentially a little NUC thing. And because I wanted something quieter that uses less power and it's less bulky, and just I wasn't really using the projector much. So I thought, yeah, let's just try this. And unfortunately, XFCE has got some weird graphics bug, and it just doesn't play nicely with this machine.
Was it too modern for it?
Yeah, because this is a 4th gen i3 in this one. So, the hardware was far too modern for XFCE. The biggest issue I had was an audio issue where I have to unplug and re-plug in the 3.5mm jack that goes to my sound system after every boot. But thankfully, Hubby on Twitter suggested trying systemctl --user restart pulse audio, and that seemed to work. So, Leonard, it's your fault.
Yes, let the record show, not KDE's fault.
Yeah, and it is really easy to add a startup script in the Plasma desktop. It's pretty easy in XFCE, but it's equally easy in Plasma, so that was nice. So I think I've solved that for now. The other issue I had was the grub theme. Distro maintainers, don't use a grub theme. Please, just leave it plain black. Or even, once I deleted the theme file, it went even more old school. It's like proper Ncurses style, like blue and whatever. But just don't use a theme. It looks nice, but you're going to have bugs on certain hardware with that. And it was just so slow. Like, it has to draw everything. It's like an old school, like 80s computer in a movie where it's like scrolling text, like writing everything out. And to go down, because I have to have Windows 7 on this for scanning, because my wife likes Photoshop, whatever. I didn't want to mess around with Wine. And so selecting on the grub menu, it just takes so long. But thankfully, it was easy enough to fix that. But yeah, distro maintainers, please don't use grub themes. It looks nice, but it's just not good. I think ultimately, it's just there's too many options, and it's too hard to find the options for things. No matter what you want to change, you can do it. It's just you have to Google everything. And failing, you say, oh, search the settings or whatever, but there's always like another menu and another layer of things. And it just takes a long time to learn it. I think that it's the kind of thing that is rewarding if you spend that time to learn it.
I think you're wrong. I don't understand how you can't just open the control panel and search for an option that way. I do it all the time because I can never remember the name of a particular thing. So I always open it up and do it that way. But I don't feel like you have to make choices at every single step of the way. Like, you're not paralyzed by choice. You don't have to change the position of wherever your start bar is or whatever.
Well, I don't know. There is one pretty serious bug. When I'm watching videos, there's no screen tearing. I don't understand. And KDE Connect is amazing.
Yeah, it is.
I know that you've talked a lot about this, but it is really good.
Yeah.
Just being able to control loads of stuff. And if you can't be asked to reach over for your keyboard, you can just use the input or whatever. It's a must-have. I hope that the GS Connect thing works out as well. I know that was under development, so I hope that does work out, because that's really cool. One weird issue is I can't play videos off my NAS with VLC. It's like hit and miss. Some play, but some don't, so I have to copy them over. I mean, it doesn't take long to copy it over, but I can't stream them off the NAS, which is a bit of a weird bug. I don't know if that's an authentication issue, maybe.
I think that's more a factor of the way the file is being rendered rather than the actual network itself. I think that is something to do with keyframes or something like that. I was trying to think of that word for ages. I couldn't. Yeah, because you often find that where a file, it won't even preview unless you copy the whole thing across. It's like it's at the end or something like that where it stores some of the metadata or what. I'm not sure.
Never had that problem with XFCE and VLC before, just saying. But one thing that it's really bad at, the Plasma desktop, is running out of RAM. This machine only has 4 gigabytes of RAM. My other media desktop has only got 4 gigabytes of RAM, and I've never run out of RAM on XFCE, or if I have, it's dealt with it all right. Actually, that's not true. I have run out once, but I think it was like a video editing thing, and it just sort of slowly froze. But I'm talking a few Firefox, or like 2 Firefox windows with a few tabs each. I think I had GIMP running, maybe VLC and maybe Audacity, and it just ran out of RAM, and then just the cursor just slowed down, and then it just froze, and I had to hard reboot it. I've never had that with XFCE.
Nah, fake news. I've run it in a VM with 2 gigs of memory, no problem. And that was a VM on another machine, and that machine was running Windows, and it dealt with it, no issue.
Well,
I think you must have ropey gear. This is the I can't even run a theme on my boot graphics card here.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what was the cause of it, but I've ordered another 4 gigabytes of RAM off eBay. So once that arrives, hopefully that problem will go away. There's one weird thing that I'm sure is a configuration thing that I can fix. On my panel near the start menu or whatever, I've got a shortcut for Dolphin. And when I click on that, Dolphin opens up and then it disappears from the panel. And I know I want to be able to click it again to get another window. And I don't like how Dolphin tabs things with, new windows by default. I want to have 2 separate windows so I can drag and drop between them. Again, I'm sure this is all configurable, but it's just not something I've easily been able to figure out yet.
That's because you're using the quick launch mode. Well, you can always right click on something and say new instance.
Yeah, but the thing is, it disappears. When I click on the little shortcut, the window of Dolphin comes up, but then it disappears.
What? I think you broke it.
It's moved to another panel where it depends how it's configured, but there's another panel for running instances, and you can actually pin Dolphin to that one if you right click on that, and then it's always there. I just use that panel, but I can't remember what it's called.
Is this because it's not respecting the fact that I told it not to use the internal display? Because this thing is a projector, right? And so it's basically a low resolution laptop is kind of how it looks to the OS. But I've told it just disable that screen and only use the external screen that's plugged into it.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
Right. So I found a bug there then. But I should be able to pin it to that panel then.
Yeah, you can duplicate that panel and you can pin it. I use the pinning panel.
Right.
Which works very much like the panel in macOS.
Right. I haven't used that much.
The icons are there for you to quick launch stuff, and then once they're running, you get a little dot or something to indicate that there's a running instance. But you can have more than one on at the same time, obviously.
Right. I don't like that Dolphin has a memory. I don't like that when you reboot and open Dolphin, it goes to the last place you were. I want it to just go to my home directory by default. Again,
you can change that.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, that's the answer to every fucking thing, isn't it? You can change it.
And that is ironically just new as well. That wasn't there up until last release.
But how do you change it? How do you change it is the problem. There's just too many fucking options. And I will get to grips with it, hopefully, eventually. But there's too many options.
Well, what you do is you say, go to Dolphin Preferences, Startup, and say Show on Startup, and it has a folders, tabs, and windows from last time, or any directory that you want.
Right.
Look at that. Not just your home directory, Joe. Any directory.
Right. Fair enough. So all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. My wife is worse than me for her small c conservatism when it comes to computing. She uses XFCE as well, and she's like, "Oh, everything's different," and I've had to make it like even shutting down and stuff. It's weird how there was too many clicks, so I had to sort out the menu so it was easier. But we are getting used to it, and I think it is better. That lack of screen tearing is really nice, I must say. I'm so used to screen tearing now that it feels weird without it. But yeah, I'm not going to switch over on my main machines just yet. But this is a baby step towards that. Maybe
we'll have you one day.
Yeah. Right then, we'd better get out of here. We'll be back in a couple of weeks when who knows what we'll be talking about. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Phelan.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Will.
See you later.